in setting up a conversation about food, we thought it'd be interesting to bring together two wildly different perspectives, if you like, and see if there's common ground between them. So we have in this conversation Carl Skau from the World Food Programme, who you've already met, and Nancy Clark, who is a sports nutritionist and dietitian working with some of the greatest sports people in the world from America. She was, for instance, the nutritionist for the Boston Red Sox. And they're going to be in conversation about the importance of food and nutrition. And it's going to be moderated by Juleen Zierath from Karolinska Institute. And she was formerly the chair of the Nobel Committee in Physiology or Medicine. Here they come.
All right, great. So this is the session between you and your lunch. And I'm delighted to have Carl and Nancy here. And we're going to have a really discussion about people who have a lot of choices and perhaps people who we perceive as not having a lot of choices. So Nancy, I just want to start with you. So you are dealing with athletes and really physically active people. What are the kinds of questions do they come to you with? What are they interested in when it comes to nutrition?
They're interested in performance, but they're also interested in health, because if you're sick or injured, sitting on the bench, you aren't very much of an athlete or an asset to your team. And I sit here this morning listening to all these people that are starving, and certainly they live in a world of abundance. But food is one of their...
They want to dial in prescriptions for muscle gain, endurance, resilience against injury.
They want to know, what do I eat? When do I eat? How much do I eat? How is it going to impact my performance? And there's been a big change in the past 20 years, 10 years, of how food used to be I just burned off 1,000 calories on my 10-mile-long run. Now what am I going to eat?
Haagen-Dazs.
Yeah. And it's like the more you exercise, the more you can eat. And again, there's just a world of abundance and just on the seafood diet. I see it, I eat it. But today, people are, as you say, they're dialing in. They want to know, like, how many grams of protein? How many grams of carbohydrate? What's the best sports drink? So it's fascinating.
So really specific, and kind of the micro world. Yeah. And you deal really with the macro. I mean, obviously you deal with the world, but what kind of questions are coming to you and the needs of the people that require the services of the World Food Program?
I mean, it was fascinating to see Ola's presentation, because obviously there's been a lot of progress, but it's still pretty bad. I mean, 50 million children are suffering from wasting. 150 million are stunted, and every minute 5 children die out of malnutrition in the world. So it's pretty bad still, and beyond that, when children grow up having been malnourished, they live less healthy lives and obviously less productive throughout their lives. So it has a massive impact also on the economy. I think the World Bank said something, $1 invested in child nutrition is $30 back basically for a society. So we are together with UNICEF, trying to work towards, on the WFP side, really try to prevent children from, in the first place, end up in malnutrition. And then UNICEF is working on the kind of treatment side together with WHO and others. And again, I think the challenge we have, we know how to do it. That's not the difficulty. The challenge is funding, really, to have enough money to reach, the millions now that needs our support. And often it's also about access. In these conflict areas, it's very difficult to get to people. In Sudan, there are whole areas that are closed off, and we are not able to get to. So, yeah, that's a little bit, but it's, we are working on this, but we need more funding, more political support to get to people in need, really.
Well, some of what you raised is an inequity of food availability. And I want to contrast between both of your worlds. And, you described that perhaps there may be some countries where there won't be Olympians. So talk to me about inequity, and I'm going to actually come back to you about that topic as well. The availability of food and what that means for societies and individuals.
Precisely. I'm a part of a larger organization, Professionals in Nutrition for Exercise and Sport, and one of our goals is to bring sports nutrition around the world, because there are many countries that where the children, one, they don't have access to food, so that they might be stunted. They'll never get to become an athlete to start with. But for those that do have that luxury of having nutrition, what do they eat, and how do they compete against the world stage, where other people are educated about carbohydrates and proteins and fueling up, fueling during, refueling afterwards? Like I say, there's a lot of inequity in the world, and it starts at a young age.
And that's the theme I think I'm hearing a lot today about reaching children. And you know, you think about developing nations and the accessibility to get food and how that affects a nation, the equity of food, and the productivity of citizens moving beyond that. Can you comment on that from your point of view with the World Food Program?
I mean, it's not the availability really of food that is the problem. It's the accessibility, as you are correctly saying. And you know, in many contexts where we work as well, it's really an issue of inequality. And so to change that, what we need to change is really the fundamentals of the economy and of the food systems in those countries. That we can't do as WFP, but we can advocate for that, and we can work with others like FAO and the World Bank and others to try to promote that. But again, I know that you know, it's to repeat somewhat what was discussed in the earlier panel, but we think that school meals is really a great concept, universal school meals, because that it also addresses this issue of unequal access, because it's also a concept where you can discuss nutrition with children as part of kind of the rollout. You know, you're not only getting that school meal, but you're also talking then about food, not only with the children, but also in the community. So it's has had that impact also beyond in terms of the broader kind of nutritional education and awareness in communities.
But I think it's not just limited to this region of the world. I mean, we see this even, you know, in your field, people becoming more educated on what food really means. You know, again, you can go back decades and think food was just a source, but now we know so much more about the kinds of foods we eat. My area of science is diabetes and obesity, and we're learning just processed foods versus unprocessed foods can have a big effect on our health outcomes. And maybe you're a nutritionist. Any thoughts on that? It's not just food anymore. We know much more about the precision of this.
Precisely, and athletes have so many choices. First of all, they choose, am I on the seafood diet? I see it, I eat it, it's yummy. Are they paying more attention to the impact of that food on their performance? And then they choose, do I want to be vegetarian or carnivore? Do I want to be vegan or vegetarian? Do I want to be an athlete who believes in the keto diet and having a very high-fat diet? Or am I more plant-based and carb-based? Am I eating an anti-inflammatory diet? Because when I'm doing all this exercise and all these injuries, you know, I get little injuries that get inflamed. So that they're making so many decisions, but they have the opportunity to make those decisions. And I think that, but that said, there are athletes who, you know, it's expensive to be an athlete. You burn off 4,000 calories a day, which is twice as much as the sedentary person who's eating 2,000. They have to buy more food. And not all athletes have access to that kind of money, so that budget isn't.
Well, I guess is there room for collaboration in this regard for, you know, developing food sources that are perhaps more energetic? And I don't know if your team thinks about that. You obviously have nutritionists there on your team.
No. We have many nutritionists, and we are trying to integrate this also in our programs. I mean, often it's the urgent and the important that push, or the urgent that push out the important. But this is an important aspect, that we are making sure that the variety of food that is being shared is done, you know, from a nutritionalist lens, so that we are effectively preventing malnutrition in our assistance. And there are, you know, evidence-based solutions, like I mentioned before, the fortified food that can kind of then add to the value, even if you just add, you know, 2-3 elements to what people are eating. So that's certainly a prioritized part of our work.
It sounds like two really different worlds, you know, where you have elite athletes and you're having people who just need food. But ultimately, you know, at the individual level, people all have the same needs. And I guess you're trying to reach that from different vantage points. So do you see any similarities between your two worlds, or are you so far apart? And I'm going to throw this to the two of you here.
Yeah. What I see is that food is one of life's pleasures. You as a team, you work hard, and afterwards you celebrate with a wonderful victory meal. Or before the Boston Marathon, people get together and have pasta parties. And food brings people together. It creates memories. It's just, it should be a wonderful part of daily life. But my question to you is, when people are given their little ration, I mean, do they sit around a table and eat meals together, or I mean, do they get that pleasure?
Pleasure, I don't know. But I mean, if there would be one thing, you know, top athletes are admirable people, often strong resilience. And I mean, the strongest people that I have ever met and that I meet are the people that I meet out in the refugee camps who basically have nothing. The way that these mothers, with their many children often, no men around, make their way through the day with the little they get and what they have, it's just impressive. Inspiring is maybe the wrong word, but it certainly you know, motivates us to do more to help them, really. And if they are getting the limited tools that we can give them, you know, they often find a way forward. So the strength of the human beings in those environments is really bare. And I think in that regard, I guess, somewhat relates to some of these top athletes that are also the stars of the world.
Well, I think also building the family experience, you know, and also giving people, in your case, there's a lot of uncertainty in their lives, but that's something that really brings people together, and it creates culture and memories. And also for children, it gives them a sense of security as well. In the same way, maybe you say the athletes can celebrate success, you know, they can celebrate the family unit in a chaotic world.
I mean, bread in the Middle East is something, you know, close to holy, frankly. When we were the first ones to be able to open up bakeries in Gaza after 6 months of war. And you know, the pictures and the videos that our colleagues sent from that first bread distribution to these people who held a bag of warm bread for the first time in 6 months, you know, it was close to religious, frankly, in its experience.
Yeah.
Reversely, though, when we have had to close down those bakeries over the past few weeks because of issues of getting wheat flour and fuel into those bakeries, it's causing a lot of tension, and people are desperate. Only some 10 days ago, we had 2 small children and a woman who died in kind of a stampede outside one of our bakeries that weren't able to open up. And so, yeah, that emotional aspect of food and what that means to people is something I guess also is universal.
Well, exactly. I was going to say very universal. Do you want to reflect on that or comment back?
Food is life. Food is love. Yeah, and the fact that people will just stampede to get life and love. Yeah, it's powerful.
Another question just related to, you know, not everybody's the same. We all have different needs. I mean, I guess in the world of athletes, there's this precision health and precision nutrient. That may be a luxury in the world in which you work, but you still have people that have diabetes or they have other challenges where nutrition really matters. Maybe you can discuss right now the concept of precision health and precision medicine, and maybe more on a global scale, how you might deal with individual needs, because there are other health needs and nutrition plays a role.
Yeah,
Any thoughts there?
I have athletes who, I mean, they want to drill right down to the mitochondria and just how do you best fuel, what's the precise nutrient, or is it a nutrient, or is it the food matrix? There's so much that needs to be learned, but also we see that people are so different, just in terms of caffeine, which is a common ergogenic aid. You know, you have your cup of coffee before you go for your run. Some people respond, some people don't. So that we're seeing among athletic people who are so in tune to their body that they learn what works for them and their body. You know, pretty soon we'll have tests that tell them, well, this is why caffeine doesn't work for you. I mean, you sort of know this stuff already, but you can, get precision medicine.
Markers, but I mean that's really micro again, and your world is more macro. But you still have people that maybe have obesity or diabetes, different stages of life. You have pregnant women who have different needs for their kids. Is that in the equation as well with the program? How do you deal with those challenges? Because not everybody's the same.
No, that's true. And we are increasingly working with middle-income countries to provide advice, drawing on the work that we've done across 100 countries. That's kind of a network of expertise and bringing that data together. And increasingly, as you said, also there are other challenges to nutrition that is more kind of on the obesity front, too much or the wrong kind of food. But to bring back to your question also about working together and that it's beyond food, I mean, if I stay in Gaza, it's food, bread is not enough to survive. It's very clear. And so while we managed to, in June, July, stabilize somewhat the access to food, having more openings into Gaza, the big challenge now really is water, sanitation, and basic healthcare. I mean, again, we are on the down on food, so that's going to be a problem in the next month. But, in these camps on the beaches of southern Gaza, you have about 1 million people. There is no sanitation system whatsoever. You drive through rivers of sewage, frankly. Garbage everywhere, and children walking around in the midst of this. So when the rains now are about to hit, it's going to be a disaster, absolute disaster. And the food is going to be, well, one part of it, because that kind of is a key element for any resilience. But really, it's disease that is going to be the killing element going into this winter. So while the risk now with Syria imploding, that there is less attention on Gaza, I just hope that the audience here also walk home today thinking that we have a tough winter ahead of us in Gaza, in Lebanon, and more international attention and support will be needed to solve this and to avoid a disaster.
Okay. Yeah. Going back to what you said about sort of like precision nutrition, I love to follow images and pictures of athletes. And if you look back, 10, 15 years ago to the athletes from Kenya. See, I'm from Boston, and we've got the Boston Marathon, and all these elite runners come from all over the world. And originally, the athletes from Kenya, they were so spindly, and they just didn't have the muscle mass. And now with better nutrition, or more access, I think it's called more access to nutrition. They have more protein in their diet and probably maybe different training access to building muscle or whatever. But you can just physically see the power of nutrition on one's physique. So if you compare the image of a marathon runner from Kenya in 2000, say the year 2000, and the year 2024, they're muscular and solid. And so sometimes what you think is genetics, sometimes is just lack of nutrition. But
right, and food is just a huge source for building blocks of life. And I guess you get to see that also in the programs that you have. You talked a bit earlier in the session about the sustained and the acute situations. And I think what you're talking about, Nancy, is something that's more sustained because situations changed and these athletes are coming out stronger. How do you gauge that, the acute versus...
It's good. No, it's a good question, because, I mean, if we are by any means going to kind of narrow that gap between now these needs that are rising and the existing resources, we need to work on solutions, no doubt about that. And so school meals is, frankly, part of what we consider kind of a solutions program, but we're also working more and more with climate adaptation in the Sahel, for example, by desertification, helping communities there to grow food and get their land back to be productive. So increasingly that is, of course, what we need to do, using what was referred to before, that, better to help people learn to fish than give them a fish. But you need a fish to do the fishing. You need a fish in your stomach to do the fishing. And so I think that's the balance we need to strike. And too often, frankly, we find ourselves just keeping people alive and not having the resource to be able to prioritize the more sustainable way forward and way out. But indeed, as you said, I mean, we need to work together with others then, having World Bank and other development partners come in and do with us more part of that sustainable solutions in many of these contexts, because it can't continue to deteriorate the way it is now.
No, and I think all of these steps really have a big effect down the line. I have very little time left, but I want to acknowledge the program you have where you're focused on young girls and trying to find ways to keep them in the schools and creating situations where perhaps they're not home doing all the food preparation. And that actually just giving kids the opportunity to be kids and have lives and become productive citizens is really a great thing that your organization is doing. And you see this even in the athletic field where there's new players on the ground. So I'm going to have to wind up here, but I hope by the end of this, and you're 2 minutes away from food, but I think you can see it's certainly complex. And there's a lot of intersection between health and performance, economics and humanity as well. And I think we should all take some time to really enjoy the company when we have our lunches today, because this is something that brings us all together. So thank you so much for your conversation.
Thank you.
I'd just like to thank you all for having this conversation, because bringing these hugely different worlds together, the stark contrast, it's not an easy conversation to have, it's a challenge. But it's important to try and have challenging conversations at a meeting like this, and you did it beautifully.
Okay.
And I just want to thank you all.
Well, it was tough, but we had a great panel here, so thank you.